Hello, BookTube, and I'm back, hopefully with another video if this goes well. It's not sort of a planned out video in the sense of check marks. I'm gonna try a couple videos sort of as rambling type videos on some subjects and see how it goes. But first, I want to say is that things are going with the moving, and it looks like the big move will be commencing the 9th, if I haven't already said that. Things are starting to fit into place. Still need cash for the big move. Things are going okay, but it's extremely tight at this point. So for those who can support, all the details are below in the description. So there's the commercial over. Now, as everybody knows, I am a big fan of science fiction, and more specifically, classic science fiction in the sense of pre-1965-ish type material, but even newer stuff, and I'm reevaluating some newer stuff. And I've done a video, what I'm going to try to do now before, and I've seen other people do it. It's sort of my science fiction journey up to sort of now, where it started. And I did something like this, but I thought I might try it again with adding some other sort of autobiographical stuff or things about me that may or may not be known. So yeah, it starts out. I guess I don't have really specific. I have some specific memories of being really young, but a lot of it is just sort of faded. It's sort of cloudy, foggy, and it's always been that way for some reason. But I grew up in northern Ontario on the Manitoulin Island, which is a large island in Georgian Bay, Lake Huron, and it's considered the largest freshwater island in the world. It's 100 and some miles long, and then it varies in width from like a mile or two to maybe 30 miles. I'm not sure the width, but I know it's over 100 some miles long. And it's connected to the mainland to the north by a swing bridge, so which means there's a bridge there, and then when ships come through, it turns to allow ships come through. And the North Shore, it was really huge area there where there was a lot of coal being shipped out, and even in the 19th century, after the Chicago fire, a lot of the timber came through there, and and I was born in that little town that is part of that there. Well, sort of around that area. Just outside of it, because I think it was part of the catchment of what's called the Little Current. But my grandfather had lived off the beaten track. It was a place called the Green Bush, and it was sort of outside of town, and you go up this long country road, and you're going through sort of, you're going higher and higher as well as you go up there, but it's all rock basically, but lots of trees. So there was a lot of lumber being done there as well. But there was also farming. But it was such sort of back in the beyond in many ways that in the wintertime, where the house, well, it was a log cabin. There was no electricity, no indoor plumbing or anything like that. And I have memories of getting water, going out. I remember apple trees and stuff like that, and you grew your own vegetables as much as possible. But in the wintertime, it was for sort of like about a mile from this place that they stopped plowing the snow. And at that time, in the 70s, I remember like this was a lot of snow. Like snowbanks on the side of the road would be like 20 feet tall or more. Like there'd be lots and lots of snow. And so very isolated, heated by, a wood burning stove. And I remember, like, I think we had a little TV at that point, but it was based on battery, a little black and white TV, like a 9-inch screen or something like that. But radio was a big thing, and I remember having a sort of a crystal radio type set and listening late at night to a feed. It must have been from the United States because at that point it's very close-ish to the United States. And listening to old radio programs, old-time radio. I remember all sorts of, horror type things, drama. But I also remember the science fiction ones. And I'm pretty sure they must have been like, X-1 or Dimension X. Those are the really sort of the best ones, I think. And I was always fascinated by that type of thing. So I think that's where the spark of science fiction sort of started within me. I wasn't reading at that time. But then later, it would be more supplemented by that, and the proliferation of the old 1950s Cold War type, science fiction, the sci-fi, most of it crappy, but still has a charm to it. But every so often, you get to see a really good film, because there were some made at the time. I did the science fiction movie tag, and that's why it prompted me to do this one now. It mentioned Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, the original Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951, directed by Robert Wise, starring Michael Rennie and Patricia O'Neill. That was just a fabulous, and that really knocked me, far for science fiction wise. And then Forbidden Planet, and there was a number of others, and even the schlocky ones. The schlock was sort of fun, as well as the schlock horror stuff. But the schlock science fiction prompted me more to read science fiction, and I really don't know what the really, really first science fiction I read. I'm sure it was some short stories. It could very well have been, actually, like the Barsoom stories. It might very well have been, because I did read some of that fairly early on in my sort of mid-teenage years. And that's the other thing. I didn't read a whole lot. I read a little bit. But it didn't become a huge thing until I was in my late teens. Then it sort of took over my reading. Barsoom, and other things like that, like short stories. I'm sure I remember getting these, book club editions of collections of short stories, the sort of the world's best SF and stuff like that. I think edited by Donald Wollheim. They're the ones that are multicolored, like they're orange spines, and they have stuff. They're around there. They're actually quite good collections. And I know at some point I read a story by Clifford Simak, and I really liked it. So it was like, anytime I read a story by somebody I liked, I probably wrote down or tried to remember who that author was. So, and the next time I got something, or later, as later years went on into the early 80s, at bookstores, I could find stuff. And every time I found and read something by Clifford Simak, or Simic, and I enjoyed, and I definitely stumbled onto City, and that just, I just loved that. And then reading Isaac Asimov, which I loved, the Foundation books, and then do I think I first came? I'm not. I might have first came across Dune in a partial story in the Analog magazine. That might have been the first um, glimpses of it, and then until I found the book and read the first trilogy, and then it was later through the '80s, I think it was, that the other three eventually came out. And at that point in the early '80s, I was, we moved a little bit around up there, um, and but always pretty well, like, living quite basically, getting a few books here or there. Other family members had books, and sometimes I sort of stole them to read. And then, but it was really when I turned 14 or 15 and being in Toronto, and going to live there, that I was opened up more to to things, and having a teacher um, that took an interest in me and reading, and realized that when I was in grade 9, I think it was, that the books that were assigned, was it grade 9 or maybe grade 8 or grade 9, the books that were assigned to me weren't fulfilling to me. I just, I'd go home and read them in the evening and do their little test thing, and I would always get 100% off. It was just, multiple choice things. So it must have been the first holiday that we had. It must have been like a Christmas holiday, that he took me into their little storeroom where they had all the fiction books that they would hand out. And he started giving me stuff that was rated for grade, I think, 12 and 13. So he just pulled off stuff like, some Dickens. I remember Tale of Two Cities. I remember the Picture of Dorian Gray, and a whole bunch of it. He gave me a whole stack, like probably about 10, 15 books. And he says, try these, or, sample them. So I went home and started reading, everything. I read them all, and some I liked more than others, that I remember. But also, too, is like at the same time I was going to, like, he wasn't too up on like me reading science fiction and stuff like that, but I enjoyed it. So, and I would go down to, in Toronto, the no, not Bloor Street, Queen. Oh, my memory, COVID brain. Queen Street, I think it is Queen Street East, or Queen Street West, Queen Street West, where it was just, there was a proliferation of bookshops there. And I remember one village bookshop that had a lot of science fiction, like a lot of cheap paperbacks. They had two little locations. And then I found, which was there, a dedicated science fiction bookshop. It's still apparently going. They claim it's called Back, or it was called Backer Books, but they claim that they're the oldest bookshop, science fiction bookshop. That's not. But anyway, I eventually worked there a little while. So, but they, there was some newer stuff, but they also had a lot of older stuff, and I found, just kept buying stuff and more magazines. And that's probably where, at that point, I first stumbled onto Dune, I think, in an analog magazine. But yeah, I just sort of, continued buying like anything that I could find that I liked, and just all through the '80s, and just consuming. And most of the stuff I bought, because I couldn't really afford new books that much. So it was so I was relegated to cheap old paperbacks that were like basically a dime or less, like really, really cheap, of the older science fiction from the '60s that were printed in the '60s, early '70s, and which were reprints of older stuff. And that's what that was feeding my science fiction addiction all through the 80s. And and then I also sort of discovered, uh, I did discover the science fiction magazine, and that's where, working there, I was able to read. Oh, don't tell anybody, but read the magazines and put them back on the shelf. So I did get some contemporary. So I it wasn't all, but I couldn't really afford to buy any of this new stuff. And I also discovered a magazine called Locus, which I that probably that, and I think the editorials of Isaac Asimov in his what is it? Isaac Asimov science fiction magazine, because he would occasionally write about science fiction, and I think that and Locus got me interested, quite a deep interest at that time, but I didn't pursue it as much at that point in sort of the history of science fiction, which would eventually be the history of science fiction. Um, and but I was interested in it, and I continued to do this. Did other things when I was in Toronto, and then eventually in the late 80s, 88, 89, I moved west to go to university, and that and science fiction sort of kept me going at that point, and other books too. I was just voraciously reading, like all the time during the 80s when I was working and everything. I don't know how I read so much while I worked like two jobs and things like this, and going to university. Just continued reading. Well, part of it was because I had to work, and I was working security guard, and so you get a lot of free time. Like, I was working 12-hour shifts, basically every Friday, Saturday, and every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, and sometimes other times during the week. But I did 12-hour shifts those times, so it was very easy to do. Like, out of the 12 hours, I probably had 10 hours of dead time. So I studied, and a big thing of me studying was biblical Hebrew, so that took up most of my time. But I did everything else, but I still probably had a good 4 to 5 hours every night there to read. So I'd polish off a book, a short book, or sometimes two, depending on the length of it, or short stories. And so I just continued, and I always read going to school on the bus, to the university, in between classes. I was never very good at studying in the library that was there. I couldn't. I would get the books or photocopy material for my class, and I would do it at home. But the time that I spent there, I read fiction. Um, and getting to class, and you're a bit early, I'd read a little bit. Just you fill in every minute, sort of. Lunch, if there was no one else around, then I would do that. But then one day a week there was always, or a couple days a week, we always had a class in the afternoon. I think it ended at about 3 o'clock or something, and then it was like 7 o'clock at night was an evening class. Like, it was like a 3 hour class that was in the evening, twice a week, or or once a week. I can't remember quite, but there was a bar that was across from the university that it was popular, and it's still there. It was called Phil's Grandson's Place. You going down in the basement. Oh, I saw so many bands there and stuff, but we'd go there and have wings and drink beer every time. So basically, we were staggering into our archaeology classes, but that was fun times. But on the days, there were a few days I took other electives that others that I knew weren't there, so I did have this long period of time, at least I think one day a week. So I just read, again, fiction. Anyway, and a lot of it was science fiction, because it was easy for me to consume the science fiction while I was, in little bits and pieces, rather than more serious literature. Like I did read, but I read that at home, on the weekends or something like that. Even though I worked, because I would read science fiction and literature there, I didn't need that much sleep. So I'd get home at sort of, the shift would end probably 7 a.m. and I'd get home. And by 8, I'd be in bed, but I'd be up at noon. So I still had 7 hours before I went to my shift on Saturday and Sunday. So just a lot of reading because I didn't have to study on the weekend at home because I was studying. In at work and getting paid for it, which was perfect. And then some other times I would do some other shifts, night shifts, stuff like. Sorry, excuse me, my allergies or something is really up and really getting to me. But yeah, so that's sort of how it was, and there was another bookshop there. This is Kitchener Waterloo, where I lived, and Waterloo was where the university was, Wilfrid Laurier University, and there was a comic shop, but also sold science fiction. And up at the top, he had a whole bunch of old Galaxy magazines, in bags. They were in like perfect condition. And I remember buying the first 3 because it had a Clifford Simak story in that I hadn't read up to that point. So that was fabulous. So then I wanted, and they've been apparently, I guess, sitting there for years and years, maybe even decades, and all the other stuff. And he was selling the magazines like old analog, astounding magazines, magazine of fantasy, science fiction, and other things, like really cheap. Like it came out with boxes of this stuff for a penny a piece. I think I remember at one point. So I bought everything that was there. I eventually made a deal with them. I bought all the Galaxies, which was mostly 50s and early 60s, and it was almost complete collection. So I bought all that and lugged it home, but I didn't live too far. I was literally just around the corner, but up like 3 floors. So I had these hundreds of magazines, and then I go in one time and the owner was saying, "Oh, come with me," and he takes me into the back, and he had like 10 or 15 boxes of these old digest sized magazines. Some of them older ones, the pulp size, and that was the other thing. He had some of the pulp stuff too. So I literally bought everything that was there, and it was extremely cheap. But then he just says, they need the space for this. If I want to carry these away, take them away, I can just have them. I didn't even look to see what was in there. So eventually, over however many days or weeks or whatever, I just carried a box at a time home. And it wound up that there were duplicates and multiple copies of some of the stuff. But I had a whole wall, like I had an apartment that you walk into the kitchen. It was like this, and then down one side of it was the bedroom, and then down the other side of the wall separating was the it was an attic apartment, but was the living room, and then the bathroom was sort of end to end with the kitchen one end and bathroom with the other. And so you had a long wall, a separating wall. So all that one wall, I got some shelving that was a bookshop across from the science fiction one, went out of business, and they were just ugly green painted wood shelves, but they were free, so, and they just fit perfect between that space. So I had floor to ceiling, and I just filled those with the magazines, and just put them in order, and tried to find other stuff, and just I just kept reading from this material. And then as a couple years go by, I do my archaeology classes and degree, and go off on my in 91, I guess it was, to Jordan. But let's just back up before that, because I well, it's about the time, but yeah, I think I got from the library. I got the Alexei and Corey Panshin's "The World Beyond the Hill," a sort of history of science fiction. It must have been 89, 90. It's somewhere around there. Well, one of those 2 years. I can't remember exactly which. And it just floored me. It was a history of science fiction, sort of up to the end of the golden age. So basically, Second World War, era, late 40s and maybe beginning of the 50s. And I just absolutely loved that book. And then shortly after that, I found a battered paperback copy of Brian Aldiss's Billion Year Spree, and that was in a dime bin. There was several bookshops in Kitchener at that time, and there was one Casablanca. They would have a little bin out front and full of mass market paperbacks, and they were 10 cents each, a dime each. So I would always go through there and pull anything that was science fiction out, especially if I hadn't read it or didn't have it. Um, and I did this routinely because, again, it was just a short walk from where I was living. And I found like a battered copy of this Billionaire Spree. And I love that as well. And that really solidified for me an interest in the history of science fiction because I was kind of running out of stuff. I would say, like, I was getting a little, like, every time I would see a science fiction book or something like that, I read it, book wise. So that's where the magazines came in really, really nice because most of that stuff had never been reprinted. So I was able to mine that. So that kept me going. The only time that I had authors, I had this duotang with list of books that I wanted to either upgrade or different editions, better editions. Like obviously Simac was in there, so I would always look for that, and I would still buy science fiction books, but it would be specifically from that list. And then I remember because I was getting Locus at that time. And I remember reading a review, I'm pretty sure it was in Locus, of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And you hear me talk about this all the time. And I thought, that sounds pretty damn cool. By the time I got it, it must have been 1990. So at that time, I think both books were out in paperback. So I bought Hyperion and The Fall of Hyperion. And I read those back to back, and it blew me away. And ever since then, I said it gave me a Hyperion high. And I just knew at that point that, there's nothing else I'm going to read probably that's going to be better than this. And I loved, and it's just, and it's been that way, everything that I've read. And I keep trying to find that Hyperion high again, and I don't. I get it when I reread it every time, but I just couldn't find anything else. So, again, I sort of almost stopped reading science fiction other than the short stories in the magazines at that point. And I started collecting. I'd already collected a lot of, I would say a shelf or two at that point of books about science fiction, essays and stuff like that were written. I still have some of that stuff because it was sent over to me, but I began more interest in digging into those and reading those. So I began a huge interest in the history of science fiction, and that continued on. I still read science fiction, as I say, and then I guess when I started my bookshop. I guess it was, I started it slowly about 1994, 95, I guess. I sort of stopped reading science fiction itself. Like, I read a little bit, again, from the magazines mostly. But I just still collected the nonfiction stuff and looked at that more so. And that continued all the way through. to 2005 until I came to the UK, and I left all that behind, and I stopped reading basically the science fiction, and I didn't really. I read a little bit. I think I continued to read a few of my favorites like City, and some Simak and Asimov, but not too heavily. Um, but I reread at that point when I guess it was around 2000. I can't remember when did. Sorry, I just need to look here. I thought it was late night. Yeah, this is 1996. So when the last two books of Hyperion came out in the late 1990s, I reread Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, then Endymion and Rise of Endymion, and just was even more blown away by this. And then I'm pretty sure I reread it again within the next before I came to the UK. But then that sort of stopped everything. I didn't really read much at all science fiction. And then around I got ill with my second bout of shingles around 2014, I think it was. Was it 14? 13, 14. I think it was around that time. I remember being quite ill. No, sorry. No, see, COVID brain memory. I had the second time the shingles, but then later the post-operatic neuralgia came back where the pain was there. So I was off work and stuff like this for a long time while they were getting the medication, like the pain medication, to work. And when it did, I still had several months. So 2014-15, I dipped back into to science fiction, and I reread the Hyperion Cantos again. Reread the whole future history of Isaac Asimov, his works, and the 6 Dune books, a bunch of other stuff like a few more Simak, again, and then tried some other new stuff that I thought it was okay, too much. So I spent a few months delving back into science fiction, but then it sort of stopped again. And I started in 2020, January 2020, I started the BookTube channel here. And I see science fiction being talked about, and it sparked my interest back. So BookTube did that for me. And the other thing was that I noticed that people were always talking, at that time, always talking about newer stuff. Nobody was really talking about older stuff. And when they did, there were a lot of errors. Like, it just didn't seem like people had a knowledge of this kind of thing. And I thought, well, maybe I can fulfill a little bit of that from my disconnected memory of everything. It's just that because I'd read so much of the old stuff that I sort of remembered authors and a few things. But it was really part of my strength, I think, is the sort of the history of science fiction. So eventually, in the last couple of years, I got all, or what was left of my collection of nonfiction science fiction, of the books about science fiction, and I've supplemented to them, and continued reading and trying. I am trying newer material, rereading stuff again. I've been on a huge reread bout basically for several years now since the COVID, and that's fine. I'm still rereading, so I'm really enjoying science fiction again, and I don't think I'm gonna leave it. At least I don't think I'm gonna drop it off again, because there's so much to look into the history again. I'm still learning, and that's a big thing that I'm interested in, is the history of science fiction, terminology, themes, and things like that, where they sort of grew from, and reading a lot of the 20s and 30s science fiction, 40s, because there's still a lot that I haven't read, even though I've read mountains of this stuff. there's always something new, or especially as years go by, a new perspective in this. So yeah, so that's sort of my science fiction journey with a lot of sort of personal aspects to it. And as I said, it was just a rambling video that I thought I've been thinking of doing. And there's one other one that I'll probably hold off and do at a later time. But yeah, this was it was sort of fun going down memory lane with this. And if anybody else wants to revisit this theme, I'd love to hear other people. What they have to say with their journey through science fiction, uh, or any other genre, which could be just as interesting as well. But because I've been rereading Hyperion, and I've just started today, I've been behind. I should have been reading it the whole week, but I haven't. The Rise of Endymion, which is 800 pages, so that's a bit hefty. But yeah, so yeah, I'll leave it there, and I'll be back. I still got several tags that I've been tagged in on that I'll try to do, and as I said, I got another rambling video, and try to do things, and it's I guess at this point I'm procrastinating a little bit, but there's stuff to do. I've got everything set up with the new house, everything set up to be connected, the utilities. It's just this stuff needs to be dealt with, and that's going to be dealt with the 30th or 31st. So it's just, I guess, at this point, I'm getting a little anxious, and I want it done, but I also need something to keep me busy for the few hours that I have, ability to think. And I think reading would be that, because I've given up my subscriptions for Prime and everything. But again, I will bookend this with any help that you can give, and if that just means liking or making a comment or sharing the video, it gets more traffic, as you know. So the ability for somebody to come along and say, "Oh yeah, I'll help him out with the big move." Because I do realize that not everybody has the ability to do that monetarily wise. But also, too, and like I say, it's going to be the 9th. It commences here in Bedford. And if anybody is around, like close enough by, that would like to help load up on that day, great. And then on the 10th, we'll be unloading up in Carlin Howe. That's just north of Whitby on the coast. If anybody's nearby there and would like to pitch in to help unload, feel free, get in touch with me. And then it's back here on the, we're back on 9th, 10th, 11th. Then on the 12th, we're loading up here again. Is that right? And then back. No, the 11th loading back up here, and then unloading again on the 12th. Up there. So if anybody's free those days, feel free to get in touch with me and help. If you want to help to do that. But there'll also be, if nobody can make those days and they're in that area up there, there's still going to be help that I need to sort of reassemble the bookcases, get everything unpacked, eventually. So there's still things that if people want to do, they can. So, yeah. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thank you, BookTube.